Have you ever imagined a place at the bottom of the sea that, instead of being a paradise of corals and tropical fish, turned into a real ghost landscape, full of tons of rubber floating aimlessly? It sounds like the plot of a science fiction movie, but it is real, and it can be much scarier than you think. Get ready to discover how human ingenuity and the desire to solve a seemingly simple problem led to the creation of an underwater desert, which today serves as a warning to the entire planet. What happened in this place will change your perception of the environment and collective responsibility in such a profound way that you may even rethink the way you deal with the small pieces of trash in your daily life. But make no mistake, the story I'm going to tell you does not have a happy ending, at least not yet. And, believe me, when you realize the extent of the damage, you will understand why it is so urgent to talk about this subject. Stay with me until the end to discover all the shocking details of this story and how it can relate to your own life. It all started in the early 1970s, at a time when the notion of environmental protection was still in its infancy. There were protests against pollution and hippie movements extolled the love of nature. But the practice of dumping waste into the sea was seen by many as a simple solution to land-based disposal problems. It was precisely in this mindset that the Broward Artificial Reef (BARINC) initiative was born, a non-profit organization that thought it was making an extraordinary contribution to the environment. They came up with the idea of taking millions of used tires, which were chaotically piling up in Florida cities, and dumping them on the ocean floor, just a few miles off the coast of Fort Lauderdale. The goal? To create a huge artificial reef that would serve as a habitat for corals and other marine creatures, while at the same time cleaning the mainland of a huge environmental liability. At first glance, it sounded like the perfect solution, worthy of applause and optimistic headlines in the newspapers. However, what no one could have imagined was that, at the bottom of the sea, reality would respond very differently than expected. To start the so-called Osborne Reef, the United States Corps of Engineers approved the proposal. Volunteers made their vessels available and companies like Goodyear supported the cause, including throwing a gold-painted tire as a symbol of the inauguration, amid flashes of cameras and hopeful speeches. Around 2 million tires were carefully positioned in a vast area of 150,000 square meters, located approximately 20 meters deep, between two existing natural reefs. A barrier was built to keep the tires confined and tied with steel cables and nylon straps, all to ensure that they remained where they had been left. The confidence in the project was such that the general feeling was that human beings were, once again, proving their ingenuity by finding simple solutions to big problems, and, in the process, contributing to marine life. But the sea, with all its strength and unpredictability, was silently waiting to show that it is not so easy to manipulate its cycles and currents. What happened next was a shock to everyone involved and, later, to the scientific community. With the action of salt water, ocean currents, and weather phenomena that plagued the Florida coast, the cables and tapes that held the tires together began to break. Little by little, millions of tires began to come loose and, at the mercy of the currents, began to spread across the ocean floor. Instead of creating an artificial reef teeming with life, a field of rubber was created in constant movement, where each tire poses a threat to marine life. Worse still, their mobility causes any organism that tries to attach itself to form corals to be destroyed. A small movement can tear off pieces of reef or dislodge creatures that take years, even decades, to establish themselves. During hurricane seasons and stronger storms, the situation becomes worse, with tires traveling increasingly greater distances, even being found on beaches in other states of the country. The scene is heartbreaking. a graveyard of tires that prevents coral from growing and puts countless marine species at risk. If you are wondering how big this disaster really is, just imagine millions of rubber artifacts rolling across the ocean floor, being thrown against natural reefs, suffocating local fauna, and creating an immense underwater desert. This scenario has not only seriously damaged the region's biodiversity, but has also compromised fishing and tourism in Fort Lauderdale, a city known for its beaches and close relationship with the sea. With the emergence of an underwater landscape where there is practically no refuge for marine life, fish are moving away, corals are unable to establish themselves, and the entire ecological cycle is threatened. The lack of life is so striking that some divers report the sensation of swimming in a place without color and without the sounds of creatures, something that generates, in addition to sadness, a palpable fear that the damage will be irreversible. Although the removal of tires began a few years ago, it is estimated that there are still at least 500,000 of them at the bottom, which suggests that the problem will not be completely solved in the near future. The government and the international community realized the gravity of the situation and began organizing operations to remove these tires from the ocean. The United States Army, for example, took advantage of the challenge to train its divers in underwater recovery operations, while also trying to reduce the catastrophic environmental impact caused by the poorly planned initiative. Technology has evolved since the 1970s, but removing so many tires spread over such a huge area has proven to be a much more complex task than initially thought. In addition, many of the tires are entangled in natural reefs, which requires extreme care to avoid further damaging the already fragile marine formations. Removal projects, which began effectively around 2007, continue, but with limited pace and resources, depending on both official funding and donations and volunteers. On the other hand, the hope is that, with the gradual removal of these tires, marine organisms will recolonize the region and the underwater desert will give way to a new lease on life. However, this rebirth will take a long time, potentially decades, and that, of course, if the cleanup and protection efforts are continued. Despite all this disaster, it is important to emphasize that this story teaches us about the urgency of rethinking our role in the environment. The Osborne Reef case shows that rushing to find solutions to waste disposal problems can lead to devastating and long-term consequences. At the time, there were no in-depth studies on how rubber would behave in permanent contact with salt water, nor on the possible risks of dispersion. Today, we live in an era in which information is at our fingertips, and yet we continue to generate enormous amounts of waste, disposing of it inappropriately. If this disaster can teach us a lesson, it is that every choice we make, no matter how small it may seem, can impact the world in ways we cannot imagine. Perhaps it is time to realize that the seas, like all parts of nature, react to what we do, and, when we react too late, we run the risk of facing truly frightening scenarios, similar to an apocalyptic world deep beneath the sea. In our daily lives, we often act without realizing the consequences of the simplest acts, from the way we throw away plastic to the way we deal with unbridled consumption. If each of us reflected daily on what we can do to be part of the solution, whether by reducing our consumption of disposable items, supporting recycling projects, or even praying and asking God for wisdom to make more conscious decisions, we could prevent tragedies like the one in Recife or Osborne from happening again. In moments of prayer and preaching, it is always important to remember to ask for forgiveness for the times when we are negligent with God's creation, as well as to pray for peace in our hearts so that we do not become discouraged when faced with such great problems. With faith, it is possible to find ways of personal conversion that lead us to more sustainable and compassionate attitudes. Take the opportunity to write in the comments the names of people who need prayer. This could be the first step in a great chain of good, in which we come together to take care of each other and also of our planet. Now, I would like to know your opinion. What do you think about this enormous environmental challenge of the Osborne Reef? Leave your thoughts, questions, and also the names of people you would like to include in our prayers in the comments. It is very important that we create a community for discussion, because the more people know about this story, the more chances we have of finding solutions, or, at the very least, preventing something similar from happening in other parts of the world. And don't forget, like this video if you found the topic relevant. Subscribe to the channel to follow more impactful stories like this one, and share it with your friends so they can also learn about the risks of underestimating the power of nature. Together, we can make a difference in protecting our planet and raising awareness among all those we love. Thanks for watching and see you next time.